listening to that. Adrian Huston, tax expert. Good morning, Adrian.
Morning, Linda.
Kevin's worried about the timing of all of this, as you heard, but I suppose in one way there was good news about furlough because it's being extended and tapering off. Employers will have to pay a bit more, but the hope is it will prevent a wave of redundancies.
Well, that's right. I mean, the problem is at the moment employers have to pay the national insurance and any pension contributions for staff that are on furlough. So they're already paying something for people who maybe are not able to do any useful work or where the business is closed. So these extra contributions are a worry, and there's no doubt that over the summer some jobs will be lost. We can only hope that our executive allows businesses to open up in May and June, so that there's a chance that the businesses actually have something into which to put their staff, so that the staff are not just a burden on the business, because businesses cannot keep paying when they're not allowed to open. Data
not dates, as they say, of course. But we've talked a lot in the last year, really, about support for the self-employed. That grant, that's been extended, and more people can now, people who previously missed out possibly, can now apply.
Yes, that's right. A lot of us pointed out that there were some significant numbers of people who missed out on the previous grant because, for example, they were recently self-employed. So long as they filed their 2019-20 tax return by the 2nd of March, and of course they should have filed it by then, these newly self-employed people have a good chance that they will come into the fourth grant, which will cover the months February, March and April. Now, frustratingly, that grant can't be claimed until late April. So I'm not quite sure what the Chancellor thinks people are supposed to survive on for February and March and early April. But anyway, that's when HMRC feel they'll be able to get their act together and have the scheme running.
Right, so more people can now apply, which is good. What did the Chancellor do about taxes? Because the Conservatives had pledged not to raise income tax, and technically you could say they stuck to that promise. But by freezing the tax-free allowances for the next 5 years, will that lead to millions more paying extra taxes?
Well, there's no doubt it will need to lead to a lot of people paying a little bit more tax. The people who are most affected are going to be the people who earn relatively little, and maybe they move from not paying tax if they're earning about, $12,500 a year to people to then paying tax, and also people who are up at the threshold of maybe 50,000, where even if they didn't get an annual pay rise, if they get any form of annual pay rise, then that may push them into higher rates, because the rate at which you hit higher rate tax at 50,270 is going to be frozen for a number of years. And so it's a sort of a stealth tax, but more importantly, it's a relatively innocuous way to get a bit of tax out of a lot of people. People won't notice it too badly. They would notice it much worse if he was to say, right, it's going to be 21% tax for people rather than 20%. This will be relatively slow, and it only affects people whose income does go up. So, if you're in the civil service and you're not getting a pay rise this year, this won't make any difference to your net pay.
But it's reckoned it'll bring in £20 billion over the 5 years ahead. So that's something the government needs to bring in to pay for all the things they've been doing for a year.
This whole thing has been unbelievably expensive. I reckon my children will be paying more towards this than I ever will, and I really feel for the younger folk who are going to end up paying for this. But it's the way the government has done it, and it has prevented a lot of lost jobs at this point. But things will change as the economy gets going again, and we'll see how many jobs and businesses have survived.
What about both the hospitality business and the self-catering? They're both areas that really rely on people being able to go out to eat and drink and go to self-catering accommodation, none of which we're doing at the moment.
Absolutely, and the changes announced are very helpful for those if they can get opened before July, so that tourists can make bookings. In hospitality, the Chancellor had reduced VAT to 7.5%, which is fantastic, and he's to 5%. He's extended that to the 30th of September. So that'll get us over that summer period, so that's very helpful to the restaurateurs, etc. And then that's going to be at a middling rate of 12.5% until the 31st of March next year, and then it will return to the to the regular 20%. Self-catering is an interesting one because a lot of self-catering businesses got not a penny in support, even though they lost thousands of pounds of income last year and will be losing thousands this year. They've lost the Easter bookings, they've lost pretty much everything up till May, maybe June. But they can now claim under the localised restrictions scheme. And I'm sure you'll put a link up on your website.
The link's already
that.
up, Adrian.
Excellent. Oh, you're ahead of the game. And so that allows them to get £800 per week for, at the moment, a 10-week period. So if they put that claim in, within a couple of weeks, they might have £8,000. Will hopefully go a long way towards plugging the gap in their income for the last year or two.
From what I'm hearing, the prices they're charging for the next coming season are fairly high too. Listen, as the questions come in from Fred, could you just explain, Adrian, what are the conditions for qualifying for the self-employed scheme?
Yes, the conditions are primarily that self-employment has to be at least 50% of your income. So if you started business in 2019-20, the revenue will initially look at the income for that year, and if your self-employment was 50% or more, you'll be able to get the relief even if you've never claimed anything prior to that. If it's less than 50%, then if you were self-employed in previous years, they will look at an average over 4 years. And if your self-employment is 50% or more over the 4 years, then again, you'll qualify. Unfortunately, if your profits from self-employment are over 50,000, you won't get a penny. So those people are definitely not winning.
And what do you think, looking ahead, will people be willing to go back to work?
Absolutely. And I think what people really need to do is get back to work. Don't wait until their employer says, I insist that you're here on Monday morning. Get back in as soon as you possibly can. Now, that might seem a bit rash. Some people are terribly scared out there. But what they need to think about is, what have they demonstrated by sitting at home this last year? They have demonstrated that their work either doesn't need done because they weren't working, or that they could work remotely. If they can work remotely, then the question is,
are you really needed?
Are you really needed? Sainsbury's laid off 500 people.
Yeah.
And could your work be done cheaper by someone overseas working remotely?
I've heard that too. I'm worried about women in the workplace, I have to say, doing so much childcare. A question come in for you, Adrian. Council-owned caravan parks are continuing to charge VAT to site holders at 20%, despite the Chancellor reducing VAT to 5% to stimulate the economy. They're only paying 5% VAT to HMRC, but are continuing to charge the site holders 20% and pocketing the difference, 15%. This impacts over 100,000 caravan occupiers on the North Coast. We're talking about caravans later in the programme too. But a question come in for you, Adrian. Council-owned caravan parks are continuing to charge VAT to site holders at 20%, despite the Chancellor reducing VAT to 5% to stimulate the economy. They're only paying 5% VAT to HMRC, but are continuing to charge the site holders 20% and pocketing the difference, 15%. This impacts over 100,000 caravan occupiers on the North Coast. We're talking about caravans later in the programme too. But they're worried about the differential between that 20% and the 5%.
I find that rather alarming. If the caravan park people are paying 5% to HMRC, then that's what they should be paying to the caravan owner, charging to the caravan owners. I would suggest that they contact either HMRC or their local MLA or MP to raise this, because I smell a rat there. That doesn't sound right.
Well, we're talking about signing contracts for caravans and indeed for weddings later on the programme with Jimmy Hughes. But if you've got more questions for Adrian Huston, tax expert too, he'll be back later in the programme to answer them for you. 30 30 80 55 55. You can text 81771. You can tweet me at Consumer Linda, or indeed email oyb@bbc.co.uk. And thank you, Adrian Huston, for now. Adrian Huston, tax expert, coming back to answer more questions. Hello again, Adrian. A question: did all bands of minimum wage get a raise in the budget?
I don't know. I know there was a change to the national wage, but that's the only one I have a note of in my notes. So I'm sorry. I suggest they refer to Google.
Fair enough. What are the conditions that you qualify for the self-employed scheme? I think you talked about that a little bit. Could you just elaborate on that? I think people are feeling it might be me, you know.
Okay. First of all, they will need to have been self-employed in 2019-20. Their business needs to be continuing. They need to be intending to continue as well. So if they've, for instance, put up on Facebook that they're closing at the end of June, that means they're intending to close, so they wouldn't be qualified. So long as you're still in business, you're intending to continue in business, you were in business in 1920, and more than 50% of your income either that year or averaged over the previous 3 years as well, more than 50% is self-employed, then you're entitled to relief. And £50,000 of profits, then you've got a problem.
Thank you, Adrian, for that. If you've any more questions, we'll get you answers in next week, other weeks' programmes ahead if you can. If we can, we can always help you if we can. 30 30 80 55 55, text 81771, indeed email oyb@bbc.co.uk. Adrian Huston, thank you for your expertise this morning.